Recording. All right, let's see. I'm gonna set another timer. Let's see if I can actually be quick about this. All right, we're recording. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at this example right here. This is the complete example. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna basically just break it on down. So like any library, and we went over this in Web 2, we use Light Gallery. And the first time we saw this, we were confused. The first time I see any new library, I get confused because it just takes time to know what they want you to type. And D3, the data-driven documents, it was at d3js.org, I believe is the URL. It's that same idea. There are a lot of D3 competitors. Snap SVG is another one. We've talked about this in class. React has an entire, let's see here, React.js. Oh, what is it called? Victory, I think that's called Victory Data. And this is actually came out of Seattle. Yeah. So there's lots of ways to visualize data, as you can see here, right? And like I said, if you can learn one framework, you can learn them all. And it's more this idea, let me just go ahead and skip to the end here, the more the idea of what is similar about each of these frameworks. And that's really what we're going to be covering today, is this idea of what concepts do you need to know? Because in a week, we're not going to pick up a new library, but in a week, we can be get an idea of how that library works, and also some of the concepts that's going to help us learn not just D3, the most popular one, but Snap or Victory. So I really like Victory. I think Victory is kind of cool. We do cool stuff like this. And all I'm trying to do right now is kind of sell this, this idea of data, not a static data visualization. Look at this. Like, you all have never seen Victory in your life, I'm assuming, right? Yes, maybe. I'm guessing. This is the first time you've seen this library?
Yes, it is.
Mm-hmm.
All right,
Yeah.
Yeah. You could have lied right there. That would have been fine too. There you go. But just take a look at that. Look, you've never seen this library, but you know exactly what that is, right? And it's this idea of, look, then instead of just adding React and React DOM, we're going to add in Victory as another library, in that exact same file, and access it that way. And to quickly wrap up let's see here, the New York Times does a lot of great data visualizations, and you can kind of guess what they've been. Been looking at lately, right? And they have an entire section every time they do something big, right? So you can see, let's see here, readers. They had stuff for the election. They're just really, they're really good about this, and they also use, D3. So check. All right. And lastly, if you're into sports, I know this off the top of my head. I don't know what is that. 538. There we go. Right. So why am I telling you all this? Because I think this is a great career if you are interested in this stuff. It's behind a paywall or behind a login. 538 makes really, really good stuff. Let's find something fun here in 538. Can you find the fish in the state name? Perfect. Right. No. I'm just Googling randomly here. All right, let's see how accurate the polls have been. And they make these charts based on real data. And so I highly recommend that you go ahead and first take a look at some of these examples, and what people are doing with these examples. I know we have less than jovial times, but there is some fun data in there, like accent breakdowns per state and stuff like that. I'm trying to find a fun example here. I'm struggling. Come on. Anyway, if I find a fun example, I will send it along. But every time I see a nice data visualization, I was thinking about, I wish I would have made that one. All right, new library, data visualization. Let's go be fast. All right, here's a complete example. And let's get into this. All right, step one, you're going to need it to either run VS you don't need to run VS Code. Let's go ahead and go to Professor Pen, but this runs on CodePen because CodePen is constantly building our websites, and you're gonna have to do the same thing if you run this on your local computer. So if you put this on your local computer and just hit index.html, it's not gonna show up. It's gonna be completely blank here. It's going to look like nothing because this data has to actually be rendered. All right, so in our HTML, we have a simple div wrapper. We have no CSS for this, unless we wanted to. We can come in here and just give a, what would be a good gray? All right, now our background is gray, so we can actually see that data. All right, so there's that. Now the big one, let's go and get rid of all this stuff right here, is we first need to add the D3 library. So we need to come in here and say D3, right? And that's, I think we're on version 5 of D3. Wow, we're on version 5 already. All right. And notice this here is for writing the shadow DOM for HTML, right? And SVGs, because SVG is another markup language. And this is why we learn these things in Web 2. So we're going to add that in, hit save and close. All right, so what I'm going to be doing here is I have my notes. I'm just going to simply copy and paste stuff in, okay? And what I want you to do is we're going to slowly begin to break down everything that I'm copying and pasting here. All right, so the first one is, let's go ahead and get set up with our HTML. So we did that. We set up our HTML. We added the 3.3 library. We're making sure that we're running a live server. I can't stress it to this enough. Like early in my career, I did not know about like always running a server. That's why I teach you this in Web 1. Make sure that you're constantly running that. All right, the first one is, this is the first bit of code here. Let's talk about this. All right, so these examples right here are relatively using the new syntax, and async await is really new. So basically async await awaits a promise. Just like our classes can be asynchronous, we're gonna go out into the world and say, hey, we want some data, and we're gonna wait for that data, and we're gonna have a promise that that data is gonna return. And if you want more info on that, you may have already done this in this little course here on your homework, right? So fetch, async, await, any of those AJAX methods, right, to go out and basically get data. This is another way to get, and then of course, if there's an error, say, hey, this doesn't return. Yeah, and we did something similar with React. So conceptually, you understand what this is, but in terms of syntax, this is all new. Okay. All right, then we're going to say draw this chart, and that's what we're doing right now. So first we're going to set up this function to draw the chart, and then we're going to draw the chart, okay? This gets called last at the very, very bottom. All right, so that's where draw line chart comes from. Okay, that's the first part. All right, the next thing we need to do is make sure that we actually get our data set. And what you can't see right now is I'm just copying and pasting from my notes here. All right, so let's go ahead and get this. So we don't have this thing called where our data is. So let's go get our data. Where did our data come from? So there is the data. Where did I put it? I had a CodePen pen, and I will put this into the chat. So what I did was, I can put this into the chat. This is the source of our data, and we're going to go ahead and hygiene this source. Go ahead and copy that source and put it into a new file, and it should look extremely familiar. So basically, this is a CodePen pen, right? That has just, this is the pure data source, and this was temperature data over a period of time in New York, right? Normally, what's disappointing here is normally, right, we would be able to go get this data ourselves, but the source that we got it from, oh, Apple, guess what happened? Apple bought them out and said, you know what, we're going to close up this API. So this is the API that we use to get data from, and now we can't use it anymore. So don't get me started on the politics of weather data. Basically, weather data is free. Like we can all access it, right? But how are you in? But you know, I'm not going to set up a business to go and get weather data from all the weather stations around the world. You know, Yahoo, Dark Sky are the ones that are going to be doing that. So sorry, y'all. We have to use stale data. We were going to use live data, but How do y'all feel about this when big companies buy out little companies and shut them down? This is important design. It's a really important design question. Like you all should be thinking about this is if you're building a business, if you're working with a client or you have clients is, you know, be careful about which wagon you hitch your, which horse you hitch your wagon to. Is that the saying? Which horse you hitch your wagon to? Stephanie, help me out. Am I right? Right. I'm going to go off on a small tangent here, right? Google Reader was one of the most popular RSS readers, and they shut it down. And if you don't know what RSS feeds are, that's part of the problem, right? It was one of the biggest companies out there doing this, providing this service, and they just shut it down. And so, but we're going to have, so that JSON data. Okay. All right. I'm doing a lot of talking and not enough typing here. This might be 2 lectures here. All right. So we got this data, and we just have time of day and temperature, right? Time of day, temperature. So let's go ahead and actually take a look at that data. All right, we have 2 ways, of course, to hygiene our data. We got console.log. We're going to go ahead and console.log out data set. And now that we're getting a little bit more advanced, we can actually even go console.table. Okay, there are actually many methods, right? Both will show the data in different ways. So go ahead and pop open your console and take a look at this. Okay. Come on, Copen. Oh, of course, this isn't working. Why? Because that's not our data source, right? So we're basically saying we're storing this variable, go out and get this data, and we're getting the data from here, not from this thing called data.json. So let's go out and get this data. And what, of course, as we know, right, what's going to happen is this JSON method, okay, that's inside of D3 is going to parse out all of that data, so we don't have to look at raw data. Let's go ahead and refresh this. All right. So it's got the data. All right, do you see stuff in your console?
You
Yes.
accidentally deleted one of the curly braces at the top right after the async function.
Oh, thanks, Stephanie. There you go. All right, let's check the data now. That's what explains why. There it is. All right, so the first one is our normal array return, right? This is all the data sets. So that means there's 0 to 360. So that, well, there's 365 points of data. And the data is the temperature and the day and of the time of year. And what dot table gives us is a nicer way to look at this data. Now, dot table doesn't work for the data that we've been looking at, but for weather data, it works out pretty well. So here's another way for you to look at data and hygiene your data. Notice we're not doing anything until we just check our data. Like, can I get it? Does it make sense to me? Okay, so we have the time and then the temp. All right, check with me. Good.
Mm.
All right. Is that a yes, Mariah? Or?
Yeah, sure.
All right. And then if we want a specific set of data, right, we can just go in and get, hey, give me the first indice or give me the second indice. How about we just go get the second indice? Because we never look at that one. So, right, we can break that down. So that's everything. That's a table. And then we have just this one table. So I'm going to close this one up. Here, let me comment this out. Come on, CodePen. All right. CodePen is mad at me today. Right, it's good. Again, here's the time. And notice the time. That is that universal code that needs to be parsed out. Like from this code, we get a date and a year and a time. Okay. Same thing here. And this is the temperature that day. So this is just for, this is one data set. A good way to think of this is our sets of data. We have a data point. It's basically a column. Or, I'm sorry, a row and a table, right? Because it has the X and the Y. So it has the column and the row, and that makes one data point. Okay. Then we have the data set, which is everything. So right now what we're looking at is one data point from our data set. So, right. And I'm really trying to drive this point home because these are the conventions that are consistent across these visualization libraries. All right, woo, a lot of, we still got a long way to go here. All right, there's that. All right, there's the data chart. Okay, So we console.log that out. Okay. All right. Now we want to do is use this method where we create functions to get inside of this. Now, this isn't very common, but it's a good method to dealing with this. All right. So we're going to create these functions called y accessor and x accessor, right, for the x and the y position. And what I want us to do, okay, is understand like why these things are here. So really what we can do is just, you know, get rid of this stuff, right? And just log this stuff out one point at a time. Like just give me the temp, like why we were creating a function. It just seems like needless work. A better way to think about this, and this is true of many libraries, is, right, we want to think of these as components, right? And like really, really small components. Like, so if our data changes or if our data source changes, like all we need to do is change the individual components. So, you know, we're just using the fancy new syntax. Let's get the semicolons here. Right. I'm just using this new syntax to go ahead and grab the X position. So the D is D3, of course, and that's going to go get the max temperature. And the date parser is also a part of D3, and we're going to go and say, hey, go and parse me this time. And so what time parsing is doing right there is converting all of this into just a year. Okay. And then from there, we're going to set that to the X position. Okay, so on one horizontal is the temperature. So the vertical is the temperature, and the horizontal, the X, is going to be our date. Okay, so day over time, right? So up here is going to be the temp and then time. So high temp over time. Okay. All right, so again, our data set is basically, you can think of it as a table, like a table inside of like a spreadsheet. And a data point would be a row in that table. Give me the temperature and the time of day. All right, so now that we've broken down the data, we can actually begin to start mapping this chart out. Okay, this part is a little bit just tedious. Okay, so let's get into this. All right, here. I'm actually gonna grab, I have these broken down in steps, so hang in there. All right, y'all with me so far? You just, before we even put stuff on the screen. Okay. Oh, we didn't console.log this out. Let's go ahead and console this log out real fast. So let's go ahead and console.log out y accessor and x accessor, and you can see, right, so we're gonna turn those off and just console those out. Right. Slow. It is not working today. Oh, we were doing P5 and Web 2, and oof, it was struggling. Really struggling. Okay. Oh, CodePen. All right. All right. Next thing we need to do is just set some variables, right? So basically, we're going to make an object called dimensions, and this is going to have our bounds and our height. So basically, the x and the y of our chart. And what we're drawing here is this. We're just drawing this chart right there, not the data inside of the chart, but this. Okay. So we have the wrapper, right? This wrapper right there. Okay, for everything. And so this is what we're setting the dimensions on. And all you're doing, okay, is using P5's bounded height and bounded widths, right? So basically say like, don't make this thing any bigger than this. You're just creating the chart dimensions. Okay, and this stuff is just a lot of, it's just essentially a boilerplate, right? You can even get rid of margin, right? So this is not going to have any margin on our chart whatsoever. Okay. Now you're thinking, well, I can't just draw this in CSS, because we are dynamically drawing a chart. And this is the key thing to note here, is we're setting the dimensions of our chart inside of JavaScript. All right. So the takeaway from the last minute is you're drawing your dimensions, right? Your bounded height and dimensions, right, inside of JavaScript. Okay, all right. So we're gonna. All right, we're good in that part.
Mhm.
Oh man, I'm not gonna make it. Is it okay if this goes into 2 lectures? All right, so we have that. Okay, all right. Let's see here, actual chart. All right, now what we want to do is we've drawn the dimensions on this chart. Okay. So we have drawn the dimensions on the chart and they're all in JavaScript. Now what we need to do is hook up our JavaScript to our HTML, right? And that's really what's happening here is hook into HTML so we can actually draw on the shadow DOM, which is this wrapper right here. So what element are we going to select? Well, just no different than when we do in React, right? Document selector ID, app, document selector ID, wrapper. We're going to do the exact same thing right here, but we have to tell D3 to do it. So we're just going to go const wrapper, like so. And now that we have that, let's go ahead and inspect it. Right, and you can see here now inside of our wrapper, right, we begin to start making stuff, but there's nothing there. Well, actually there is. Yeah. So let's go ahead and draw those things. All right, so we selected our wrapper. Okay. And what we're going to do, right, all right, so everybody clear on everybody, y'all, everybody good on this part.
Mhm.
Right, you're going to basically create a variable called wrapper. Hey, D3, go attach the chart that you're dynamically drawing to what? To this ID of wrapper. And then what we're going to do, and this is going to look really, really, really familiar to us, right? The next thing is we actually have to draw in this thing that looks very familiar to us from Web 2. What is this? What is a PNG? Do you remember this when we worked with SVGs? What is the G? Remember what G stood for when we were making all of our Google Doodles? And it was like an Illustrator or Figma kept making these Gs. What was it? I'm gonna pause. This part is important. SVG is the parent. Who was its child? G, right? So G was short for group, just like, div and span are just generic inside HTML. What we're saying here is just draw me all of these generic groupings. Yeah, and this is what's happening right here, right? So SVG is going to make all these G elements. And now that we have these two things hooked into the HTML, we can just begin to start styling them. All right, so we're going to go ahead and append this SVG to it. So let's comment this out. All right, I feel like I lost you right there. Questions? Common convention inside of D3, sorry, too many frameworks in my head, is 4 spaces, right? When things are related, okay? So we're going to append an SVG into this, and when we hit save, watch what is happening here, right? It's beginning to draw out our elements inside the shadow DOM. And then what we can say here is, and I'm going to go ahead and attach the attributes of height and width into this. And to a lot of nerds, this is a sacrilege, but I don't mind that, convention is 4. I don't want to get in that nerd fight, right? Tabs versus spaces. Have you all? I've showed you that video of tabs versus spaces. No? All right, so what we're doing is we're making, all right, so D3 is going to go find this ID of wrapper, make an SVG, and the SVG is going to take on the dimensions and height of what we've specified up here. And what we've specified is going to be fluid, right? and dynamic is going to take the data from up here. All right, with me so far? Okay, HTML, draw this, how big from these dimensions. These dimensions are coming from where? The data that we're pulling in here. And the data we're pulling in here should be this. So, all right, so we got that. We're gonna check this again. Okay. And what I'm gonna do now is draw the rest of the bounds here. All right, so I'm just gonna drop this in from my notes. All right, so basically what I'm gonna drop in right now, okay, is the wrapper, which is this part right there, okay, and the bounds. And the bounds is where we're gonna have the actual data. That's the bounds wrapper. Wrapper for the page, bounds for the data. Wrapper for the page, bounds for the data. All right, why are we spending so much time on this? Because you're gonna have that same conventions. Okay? Where you're gonna draw the page and the actual chart itself. Okay? And visually, when you first look at this, you might be thinking, oh, we don't have that separation between the bounds and the data. So the wrapper is just the wrapper, right? It's HTML, like wherever we're gonna put this chart onto our layout, but the bounds are here. Okay, the bounds are for the actual data itself. And CodePen is not refreshing, y'all. All right. Because I mistyped that. Let's see here. Where is, let me check this. It's not refreshing. There it is, finally. All right, and right there is our SVG. Finally. Oof, that took a while. And inside of that, of course, is the G. And this is going to be the actual line, right? Because we can't draw on the parent SVG, which is as big as the data. Okay, we're going to draw on the actual line. Okay. All right, I'm going to hurry through this one. Okay, everybody good with that one? Okay. All right, I'm gonna hurry through this so we can do another example on Thursday. You're like, oh, like this on Thursday, I'm not coming to class. All right, Lab 6. Okay, so quick recap, okay? We have an element to draw the actual line on, right? This line right here. We have an element to draw that on, all right? And we're gonna put that where? Inside of the div ID of wrapper. How big is that gonna be? The bounds, right? The dimensions that, the variables that we set, right? And that data is gonna come from where? Here, right? And we're gonna parse through that data to get the temperature and the date. All right. The next part here. Okay. All right. Sorry, my daughter just came over. Now I've lost my train of thought. I've lost my train of thought. All right, thank you. Okay, so now what we're gonna do is create these things called scales. So when we have data, okay, we need to scale it down, right? We have all this data that it's, if we come and take a look at this, right, our data set doesn't really fit what? Our data set doesn't fit pixels. Like how do we fit our data to this actual page? Because these numbers here are bigger than smaller than the pixels on here. So we can't do a 1-to-1, right? Like, 32 degrees in January doesn't make any sense when we're talking about a pixel screen. And so every library has a way to scale this, right? Or proportionally scale the data so it makes sense on the medium. And that's the big takeaway in this next part. Right? The big takeaway here is like we need to be able to take all this data and scale it to fit these dimensions that we set. So for this to work, right, of course, we have a scaling function. So let's go ahead and get into scales. So we're basically taking our temperature and converting them to pixels. What you need to write down right now is this idea of domain, okay, and range. Domain and range. And we're going to work with other people's data. got to get into this idea of domain and range. Okay. Okay. All right. What two things do we need to know from the right now? Domain and range. All right. So first we're going to set the Y scale, right? The up and down. Oh, my timer just went off. Okay. And we're going to scale this thing, right? We're going to say linearly. Okay. So making sure that our data looks the same here. Right? This is actual temperature data, but these are pixels. So we need to scale that. We can't just plot it 1 to 1. That wouldn't make any sense. All right. And so the domain, okay, the domain is like the min and max, right, of our input. Okay. And then our range is the min and max of our output. Okay. So the best way to understand this is to basically just to go ahead and console.log this stuff out. And so what I'm focusing on right now is just the Y scale. We'll take a look at the X scale later. Okay. Just the Y scale. All right, so right here, if we were to go ahead and take a look at our data source inside of the console there, basically what we're doing is we're asking D3 and saying, hey, look through all of this data right here. Like, look through all of this data for me. This is okay, I'm gonna do that. And then I can't plot anything. I can't like plot anything proportionally that makes any sense. Otherwise, this chart's gonna be all skewed. I can't plot anything proportionally unless I know the min and the max. Okay, so this one right here, this first set, right, this is our range. Okay, right, this right there, the 13 to 94, is basically how much data we have, right? The low and the high of the data. Okay, and the next number, right, is basically the max, right? The max that we have on our data set. Okay. And so once we have those two things, we can actually begin to change this number. So the Y scale data set, right? This is the first point. So 0. That's what it looks like. Okay, that's the first number in our set. And if I go 1, okay, that's the next number in our number set. And 2, okay. So what it's doing is it's taking these numbers and this is the scale, right? Good. So that way we have a proportional way, 3, right, to look at all this data. Okay, and this is what trips people up at first when you're dealing with other people's data that you're trying to map out. Okay. Good, good. Yay, yay. Right. So we have these methods called domain, right? Set the domain. Okay. Where my data is going to go. Okay. And then map that out. Like, what is my range in pixels that I need to deal with? Good. Okay. The data, right? Where to map the data. The data, where to map the data. All right, so then if we have X and we have our X, we have our Y, we can go ahead and get our X. So I'm gonna go ahead now and let's take a look at our X. Okay. All right, I'm gonna paste in X real fast, like so. Okay, here's our X scale. I'm gonna highlight that. And right now, why does it say return the negative number? Congratulations. Okay, so remember our Y scale, right, was up and down. Those are but our X scale, okay, why is negative number good? Well, this relates to the data set. That means the data never got any colder. That means that this weather data, right? Because notice we haven't turned on the charts yet. That means this weather data is warm. There's no, we're not dipping below here. We're not getting any like freezing temperatures. That means we'd have to reset the scale. So now that we have the X scale and the Y scale, right? This part is completely optional in the example. Yeah. Right. So what I'm gonna do right now is just put in this blue chart, right? It basically says, hey, go into the 32. Let's go light gray here so we can see this. Right. Go into, find where the freezing of the temperature is at 32 and just put a blue bar there. And that's all this is doing, right? Like we can even come in here and change the color to red if we wanted to. We'll have a red, but instead we just want a light blue bar. Yeah. So this is optional just to show like, hey, your temperatures are dipping into the freezing. Okay. Been doing this long enough to know when I lose students. Hang in there. All right, then we got all that. Let's go ahead and just actually draw the data onto the page now. Okay, so we got that line. All right, and boom, there is our data. Okay, now this looks like this because what we want here is not the fill, right? We want the path, right? So like we saw in Web 2, we want our SVG paths to go up and down and follow this path. We just need to take this out. Okay. So what we're doing here is we're saying we're using D3's method to draw the line, okay, and we're mapping those along the X and the Y, and the X and the Y are along the X scale and the Y scale, which we defined here, right? And all that data is coming from our X and Y accessors up here, which are pulling in data from here. Okay, so in some ways this is confusing at first, but at least it reads sequentially. Like it actually is one of the few things that we've looked at in class that reads top to bottom. All right, so now what we want to do is just get rid of all that, and that's easily enough done. Okay, we're going to add in additional attributes, and this gets people at first, right? This idea of, well, I have to keep just like filling these things in. It's like, yeah, what it's doing for you right now is it's giving you options, right? It's saying, look, just take your data and then you can fill it in any way you want. So we're going to remove the fill, which is of none. And then we're going to say, instead of filling in the space, just make a stroke like so. Okay, we can even change the stroke to be whatever color we want. All right, go. Can I get away with coral in this? Yeah, I can. All right. All right, and then we can give the stroke a width. Okay. And the hard part is we've been used to doing this all inside of CSS, right? Or using this inside of React components. And now we're just putting everything inside of one single file. We're just adding it on as attributes. There are other methods to dealing with this, but for right now, just keep adding in one attribute, right? One attribute at a time. And that's why this code looks a little bit more verbose than it needs to be. Same thing up here, right? Take the X position, the Y position, the width and the height, take the fill color, right? And that's all that's doing. Okay, and then once we have that, the chart, now we can actually put on the Amazon charts. Amazon financial reports. All right, Amazon is notorious for this. And this is where we're gonna finish class. Amazon is notorious for making charts that don't have units and labels on them. I'm gonna have to find a good example, and these aren't good ones, but in their yearly reports. And so that's what we have here. We're like, this is the temperature. Okay, where's the X and the Y, right? You know, they'll say these are our sales, and it's just be going up. Like, going up from where, right? And legally they can do that. So what we need to do is turn our charts actually on, and this is where I'm gonna let you go because I feel like I've already lost you. All right, now we're gonna draw in basically the X and the Y. And I won't go too much longer on this, but there are our charts pulled in from our data. Okay. And the thing to take note of this is there's that X scale again. Okay. And so we're just setting these four axes, right? We're setting the axis itself, and then we're appending to each axis, right? These labels. Okay. And these numbers coincide with what we have here. Okay. So there is our 0, right, to 94.21, which where my mouse cursor is. That's 94.21. All right. Whew. That could have gone better. Okay. I'm going to stop